the first question I want to ask you is, it's really, President Trump says that if you don't have a border, you don't have a country. Is that true?
Absolutely. I mean, I've been to the border twice this year. I went to the Texas border, and then I went to Mexico City, and went to the California-Mexico border. And of course, I mean, how can anybody have a country if you can't control who lives in your country, who comes into your country? I mean, every country around the world wants to do this, make sure they know who's in their country. I'll tell you the positive. When I was down at the Mexico border in California, the new wall was up. Border Patrol was very appreciative of what the president's done. They're also appreciative of what the Mexican, I guess it's the military, is doing, because they clearly had become a partner. And the number of people coming had really dropped like a rock. So way fewer people in the detention centers and things like that. So at least there it was working very well. When I was in Laredo in January, it was not working at all. We were on an airboat going a little, I guess we were going south on the Rio Grande, and just as we went that way, 18 people crossed the other way. So it was completely porous, and all of it's completely controlled by the cartel.
We've written editorials at the Washington Examiner about the fact that national countries, the only way of having democracy is having a border, because it's the thing that defines the country, and it has to be up to the legitimate inhabitants and the citizens of that country to decide things. And so if there isn't a border, the logic seems to me to suggest that without a border, there isn't really a democracy. Would that also be true?
I mean, well, how do you have a country if you don't know who is in your country, who has rights in your country, who has the right to government services? I mean, I don't know how you would do it. I mean, just it makes no sense not having one. Right. I mean, it is pretty frustrating because the Democrats, they don't want to have a border. I guess they think politically it's the right thing to do. Maybe they'll get votes or whatever. But I've been there 10 months. I just had a fight this week over some immigration stuff. There's a existing program called TPS, temporary protected status, and people in the United States, when a disaster happens in another country, if the president allows it, they have the right to stay here until the disaster is over. So that makes some sense, the earthquake in Haiti and things like that. But then nobody wants to stop it. Well, that was supposed to be a temporary program. And so I got all the Republican senators to agree on a way to fix it and provide temporary status to the Venezuelans that are here. And I've done it twice this last month and the month before, and the Democrats have blocked it both times. So it actually fixes the whole program. And then Pelosi went down 2 weeks ago, went down to Miami to tell the Venezuelans that only Democrats care for them. And by the way, she didn't even understand that the TPS meant temporary protected status. She thought it meant, she tried to explain that if you were there, if you got here, then you got here forever.
So I want to turn to you, David, briefly. You've been reporting immigration, and I want to ask about the politics, and I would obviously also like Senator Scott, if you can come back on this as well, but why has it been so difficult for Democrats and Republicans to compromise on Capitol Hill? Because they both have things that they want, and there's things like visa reform, etc., and DACA. What is it, David, that makes this completely irreconcilable? And is it simply that actually one side doesn't want to control the border? What is it?
Well, I mean, I think getting to the crux of the question, the reason that you have not been able to get immigration reform through Congress over at least the past decade, but a little bit longer than that, is all of the mini agreements that I think both Republicans and Democrats can come to or have come to in concept over the years always run up against how you handle the illegal immigrants living in the United States. And there are explanations for where the parties are today, and that's certainly important, but if you dial it back a little bit and take some of it at face value, which I think you can, Democrats will say that if we give you the security measures you want, and you don't give us the legalization of the illegal immigrants that are in the country as a part of the same deal, we'll lose our leverage for ever gaining the legal status for these people that we want. And Republicans say that if we legalize and give you the legalization of the illegal immigrants that are currently living here, then we have no guarantee we'll ever get the security measures, because of course that takes longer anyway.
Right.
You can appropriate money, it takes time to build a fence. You can appropriate money, it takes time to hire more border patrol. Also, you can dial that back. You know, from there was a bill that passed Congress that a president signed that said there should be a border fence. It never was built. And once you legalize somebody, they're legal. But neither side ultimately trusts each other to take a leap of faith. And part of that, I would say, and of course I defer to the senator here who has actually run in elections in a very diverse state and has a better firsthand understanding of this, but ultimately members of Congress over the years have not believed that there is an incentive from their constituents to take a risk on these political compromises.
Is that true?
We just did a poll at the end of my race. I've had 3 races. I've won the Hispanic vote in each of the races in Florida, and we did a poll in November right after my election, and we asked the question: do you believe we should have tougher enforcement of our immigration laws? And if you do statewide for everybody, all voters, it's about 70%, and for Hispanics, it's 69%. It shocks everybody. I mean, reality is, I think a lot of people look at this as the reason we do it is because it's lawful, that you should follow the law, and on top of that, they want to be safe. I always thought when I was governor, there's 3 primary job responsibilities: give people a job, make sure their kids get a good education, and keep them safe. And I think the part of border security for everybody and enforcement of immigration laws is, 1, it's fair, and 2, I want to be safe. So, but I think that, I mean, I'll give you an example. I talked to a senator on the other side the other day about what I'm trying to do with TPS, and their issue is exactly what David said. It's they want to deal with, they're not going to do anything to fix the existing program unless you legalize everybody that's here illegally. So we'll never get anything done. And why would you do anything if you're not going to have a secure border? Because you got to stop the problem from happening again.
There was I mean, this goes to the idea that 1986 has poisoned the entire debate, because, as a lot of you will remember, there was a deal in which amnesty was granted to illegal immigrants, and this was during the Reagan administration. And then in exchange for that, the president got, or was supposed to get, border security. And the Democrats pocketed the amnesty, and the security never happened. Is there a strong element of once bitten, twice shy in today's politics?
I don't hear that. And like, I'm from an immigration state. I mean, I'm from Florida. We have, every time they have an issue in South America, we have an unbelievable flood of people coming to Florida, which has helped build our economy. So I'm very pro taking care of the DACA kids and all these things. But I don't know that people talk a lot about 86. I don't hear a lot of it. But I think what David said is exactly right. You've got to do both, and you can't do what happened in 86, where you go down the path of creating a system that the Democrats want with no security. And why would you do this without any security? I mean, I think President Trump, he's taken a lot of heat for it, the way he's doing it. He's taken a lot of heat for that. But we are having, I mean, you look at the numbers, we're having a pretty big impact on the amount of people coming across. Everybody I've talked to on the border, it's completely controlled by the cartel. This is where people can come across. This is what it costs. This is where you bring the drugs across. It's completely controlled by the cartel down there using our laws.
I'm going to just remind people to write down questions that they might have and to hand them in, because we'd love to have your questions answered. I see one just over there that needs collection. There's an aspect of the whole immigration debate, which is obviously race, which it's it's difficult to deal with, and I've often wondered whether it's reasonable to favor immigration, and it's also cultural, to favor immigration from countries that have democratic traditions and more stable institutions and the rule of law. And that would suggest immigration from places where perhaps there isn't that much demand, but it would also mean immigrants coming in who sort of had at least an instinctive feeling for the things that are very fundamental to the United States. But if you suggest that, it means, well, there should be immigration from, say, Europe, and there should not be immigration from the Middle East, where, you know, there's no real tradition of democracy, and some people, I think, would feel that that sort of undermined the democratic culture of the United States. So what should, I mean, that raises questions of issues of racism. You know, get your charges of racism if you suggest such a thing about. What should the priorities of the United States be, and should that be an issue in deciding immigration policy?
Well, I don't meet people in Florida that don't believe in our system. And we have, you know, we're a melting pot. I mean, 20% of the people that live in Florida speak Spanish, and so I don't think that's never been an issue. I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure we educate everybody in our country about the free market system, capitalism, the three branches of government, why our system has worked, and all these things. And I think we all can do a better job of doing that all the time. But I've never worried about. And we have people from all over, and you look, the people who have come here have generally come from countries that their system doesn't work very well. Even if it's called a democracy, it's not a successful democracy.
Right, and that's why they want to come here. Is it then, you mentioned the melting pot, and I think that's very important. Melting pot implies that whatever ingredients you bring into it, it becomes part of the same mixture. What we've had for perhaps 2 or 3 decades is a kind of balkanization where people are encouraged to regard themselves as hyphenated Americans, which is to say, and I say an Iraqi American or a Polish American, or is that change in the culture where multiculturalism is celebrated and people are encouraged to think of themselves not so much as Americans but hyphenated Americans? And is it our education system and our culture really to blame for some of the problems we have about that?
You know, it's not been my experience in Florida, at least. I mean, we have people from Venezuela, Colombia, Brazil. I mean, of course, they know people from their prior country, or if they're, you know, they'll speak the right language, but they're excited to be part of America. I mean, one of the neatest things you can ever do is go to a naturalization ceremony. It is the nicest event. And you have people, you might have 100 people there, and they'll be from 30 or 40 different countries. And it's totally different than what you think. They are so excited about being Americans. One of the individuals that works with me is a new citizen from Venezuela. I don't know where he is. We had a great opportunity to go to his naturalization ceremony last year. So people are coming here because they love our dream. They want to dream. They want to dream big. They want their kids and their grandkids to have a great opportunity, and that's why they're here. I'm excited about immigration. I mean, it's got to be on a legal basis. But if you think about it, if you look at the history of this country, it's grown by legal immigration, people coming here and having a better life for themselves and their kids.
So there's nothing incompatible about wanting to control the borders, wanting legal immigration, and I mean, it's not a question of reducing legal immigration. That's not part of the thing at all.
You want people to be. I mean, look at where the drugs coming. Not having a secure border. We've got. You go down to Venezuela now. You've got Hezbollah. You've got Iran. You've got a bunch of terrorist groups. You've got ELN. Now all they have to do is come up through Central America to get to the United States. We have to secure this border. If we don't, we already have issues in this country that we haven't controlled the threat of terrorist groups, and it makes it easy if they can come that way.
David, can you talk a little bit more about the challenge for Republicans and Democrats in accepting a compromise? I'm thinking, for example, of legalizing illegal immigrants, which Democrats want, and yet also having aggressive security at the border, which both President Trump and building a wall, which the Republicans want. Talk a little bit more about the sort of the back and forth and why this doesn't happen.
Sure. So I think, let me address the Democrats first. I do think that the reaction of the Democratic base to President Trump, both his rhetoric and some of the policies that he has pushed in regard to immigration, has made it harder for Democrats on Capitol Hill to compromise. In other words, they fear that they will lose a Democratic primary if they join with President Trump in some security measures. Republicans like to remind Democrats that, 10 years ago, most of you voted, or if most of you who were here, so the party nationally, didn't have a problem with a border wall. And you can listen to clips of Joe Biden while he was a senator from Delaware around the time that Barack Obama was becoming a major figure in that party and on his way to becoming president, sounding very much like a Republican might sound today about the need to have a secure border and everybody should learn to speak English and all of that. But because of the Democratic base and their reaction to Trump, the idea that any Democrat on Capitol Hill would vote for a wall along the southern border is verboten. Like, you just don't do it now. Because it is not, from the way the base sees it on the left, it is not a border wall, it's a Trump wall. And they will have nothing to do with it. And so, when I've been covering this on Capitol Hill and I've tried to explain this to people, that it's become almost non-negotiable. There are things that you could see Democrats supporting having to do with interior enforcement. There are a lot of people that are here illegally that end up getting jobs because there's poor interior enforcement. There are overstay visas, and you could probably get agreement on that. You will never get Democrats to help the president build his wall, ever, period. You could probably get a future Republican president working with Democrats to build a wall, but you won't get them building this president's wall, because that's how they look at it, this president's wall. Now, Republicans have different challenges. Over the past 10 years, there have been, for instance, attempts by Republicans in the House and the Senate, but a lot in the House, to codify DACA, right? To do it not by executive order, which is constitutionally questionable at best, but actually pass it out of Congress so that these individuals, which are generally referred to as dreamers, can be here forever. And the effort was always thwarted because there is an element of the Republican base that says you are rewarding bad behavior. People came across the border, they broke the law, and you're telling me that I have to follow the law, and they don't. And so for Republicans to be able to codify DACA means they would also have to go against their base, but it also gets to this larger question of there are a lot of compromises in relation to security that are very hard for Democrats to accept from their point of view politically. There are also things that are very hard for Republicans to accept. And usually these things are only done when you have a chief executive that's willing to burn some political capital and give a little, and also, and in doing so, telling his own side to lump it, and trust me, I will stand up for you. And then it's up to the other side to give back. And it's just, these things are so visceral. The only other issue I've seen like this on Capitol Hill is health care. Yeah. Because it almost gets to what makes you a Democrat or Republican.
Does that ring true to you, Senator?
I think what David said's right. And it's like a lot of things. It goes down. No one wants to compromise because they think it's going to impact their elections. I don't believe that. But in my state, no one believed I would ever win the Hispanic vote. And I remember when I started running in 2010, this one Hispanic reporter was writing something nice about me, and this other Hispanic reporter said, "You can't do that." I mean, we're all the same people. We all have the same dreams. We want to do well. Our kids do well. So, no, I agree with David, though. I think it's going to be very difficult for the Democrats with President Trump to do anything, which is too bad. because I think Trump is open to, he's a deal guy. He's open to doing deals, but I think with these right now, well, they are absolutely committed to ruin this guy, and they have been since the day he got elected.
So, Senator, can you talk a bit about the actual situation at the border and the way it plays into politics? You know, when thousands of people are on the march in caravans toward the southern border, and hundreds at a time sometimes try and storm the border and overwhelm officials, can it be plausibly denied that there's an immigration crisis? And to what extent is there a difference between that crisis and the president declaring a state of emergency about it?
I think it's an emergency. I think it's just basic common sense. Do we want to have a secure border? Yeah. How do you, and we've created, with the Flores decision, not fixing the idea that we with the Flores decision, you can't be, if it's a child and an adult, you can't keep them incarcerated for over a period of time. I mean, you don't want to. No one wants to incarcerate anybody, but you're doing something illegal. But what we've done by not fixing that is we've given an incentive for people to kidnap kids, traffic kids back and forth, even if you're related to them. It's horrible for these kids. These girls are being sexually molested. I mean, it's just despicable that people won't fix these things. But I think, let's go back to what David said, I just think right now it's absolute hate for Trump. It's perceived to be a win by Trump. And so, I mean, why did the Democrats take advantage of the opportunity when I first came in January? Trump was open to doing a border deal and DACA. Jump at it. And they probably could have done some other things. I mean, the president's, I think he's very receptive to this stuff, but it is.
I think there are something like, I can't remember what the exact number is, perhaps David you can, or perhaps Senator you can, there's 20 extant states of emergency, some of them dating back to Bill Clinton's presidency. So it's not like states of emergency declarations are fantastically rare and only when you're about to go to war with Japan or some such thing. There are a lot of them, and this would seem to fall into that category. I have a question here from the audience. It's anonymous, but what is happening concerning no federal funding for sanctuary cities, which obviously plays very much into the immigration debate. They are trying to thwart federal authorities, and obviously that's a battle that the president and the administration has to undertake.
Well, we shouldn't have sanctuary cities, period. I mean, we all have to comply with the law. Every city should have to comply with the law. Every county should have to comply with the law. And so, but it's like everything else up there. It's a fight to get anything done. And so, but that one is not, at the federal level, David, since I've been up there, we've not had there's not really been conversations about that much.
No. I mean, there've been little conversations here and there about trying to do things, but in general, obviously, with the House controlled by Democrats, this is not something they're going to pursue, and the Senate calendar, has been dominated by confirming President Trump's judicial and executive branch nominees, with some legislation here and there.
Nothing would, with the dividing government between, the House and Senate, not much is going to get done.
Right. Well, does another question from the audience is they're asking what the status is of the immigration bill on merit-based immigration that was put forward by Tom Cotton and David Perdue. Presumably that is just hold up and not moving, and
nothing's going to happen until after the election, and maybe nothing will happen after that. Some of the stuff. Most Americans believe that, kids that their parents brought them, they've done the right thing, they've gone through school, they've joined the military, things like that. They ought to have some path to be able to stay here. I think that's pretty basic. But there ought to be some work visa program when people want to come here, work for 6 months and go home. It's good for them, it's good for our country. That's pretty easy. Securing a border should be pretty easy, but you put them all together and it makes it look like it's a completely Republican Democrat issue, and there's no conversation. Even like the TPS, if everything I proposed in mine, I got every Republican senator to sign off on. Let's just enforce the law the way it was originally intended, and couldn't get that done.
Right. The mistrust between the two sides often suggests that you should smush everything together into what is often referred to as a comprehensive bill. We've often argued at the Washington Examiner that the attempt should be made to pass things which can be passed just on a smaller thing, and just make improvements while you can do it.
Yeah.
But of course, if you don't trust that you're going to get anything back, then everything gets stopped.
Grand bargains don't get done, and if they do, they're generally bad.
Right,
So.
and grand bargains can be used to make sure that nothing gets done, right?
Yeah. So, but it's hard to do either one right now.
Right.
And you know, the other thing is the person that has the pulpit to get something done is the president. And so it has to be an unbelievably high priority that, it's like David said, you're going to use up some capital too to get something done. You got to put a lot of effort into it to get people to come together. It's very, very difficult.
And I would say, like, we know, and I've discussed some of the problems the Democrats have, and Senator Scott has experienced some of how they are choosing to deal with this. But within the Republican Party, there is a bit of a disagreement over whether you want robust immigration or more limited immigration, whether you want merit-based immigration or the traditional immigration that we're sort of used to going back to the 20th century. Whether you want to have temporary worker permits where people can go back and forth, or whether you don't want that. And usually what has happened when Republicans have tried to tackle this, and they've all meant well, most of the politicians I cover, believe it or not, mean well, is Republicans often have a hard time agreeing among themselves over how they want to approach fixing the problems that are inherent in our current immigration system. A lot needs fixing. And so that has made it a little bit difficult. And ultimately, many members of Congress want to do the right thing. A lot of them have different opinions. They don't really want to cross their voters on this. And this is one of those topics where their voters tend to be very opinionated. And so, you know, and that's probably a good thing, right? Because you want them to be sensitive to what you think. You're the voters. You're paying their salaries. But it makes it very hard for them to try and settle on a change that they're then willing to put their name on and push.
I'd like you both to talk about the electoral politics and the perverse incentives in this debate. You first, Senator. You know, I remember back in the first term of the Obama administration, there were a lot of Democrats, particularly in the House, who were enraged with the president over the fact that he did not deal with illegal immigration then, and they said that he should have been focusing on that rather than on health care, and he went for health care instead. And then in subsequent elections, I think midterms and also presidential, there seemed to be a cynical idea that it was much better to have immigration as an issue, where you could talk about Republicans as being racist, than to actually try and deal with the problem. Likewise, well, perhaps not likewise, and I get your opinion on this, you know, is there an incentive on both sides now not to deal with the issue because immigration plays so strongly to the base of each party in completely opposite directions?
Well, I clearly don't think, I mean, I'll give you my TPS fight right now. I clearly don't think they want to solve it. I mean, when Menendez went down, Senator Menendez went down to block my bill, I said, so what don't you like? Nothing. He wouldn't, his office wouldn't engage with us, nothing. They won't tell us what their problem is, what they disagree with. How do you do a deal with anybody to get something done if they won't tell you what their problem is? I mean, all my life I'm a business guy, all my life I've done deals, and so you find out, you know, what the other side wants, and sometimes you can come to a deal and you can't. So my experience so far, they don't want to do it. They don't want to do anything. I don't think that's true. I can tell you from my standpoint, if I could solve the immigration stuff, it's good for my state. I mean, I want to get something done, and we're not a border state, so we don't have some of the issues that you know, the Mexican border states have, but they've got a bigger issue because they have a crime issue. I don't have that issue in my state, so I think whether Republican or Democrat, they've got an issue over crime coming across the border with the drugs and things like that, on top of wonderful people that want to come. So, but I think clearly on the Democrat side, they don't want to solve it, and there might be, I don't know if there is on the Republican side. I don't hear that. What I hear is that we can't get anything done because the other side won't work with us.
David, what do you hear on Capitol Hill? Do you think that there is a fairly strong pull just on one side or perhaps on both sides to have this as a political issue rather than as a something to get resolved?
Well, I think it depends who you talk to. I mean, I think there are clearly members of both parties that it's not necessarily that they want it as an issue. What they will say is that we don't want to give what the other side is making us give, and they are asking for things that are unreasonable. In other words, I think this issue, like what I try and do for the examiners is try and get inside each side's head. And, you know, some of them spin us, and I try and look out for that. But what I have found with immigration is each side's voters are so dug in on this that they don't feel, with some exception, I mean, Senator Scott's an exception, and, you know, there are some Democrats you can talk to that are exceptions, but that aren't trying to find ways to solve the problem because they realize they're going to have to give something. There are people on both sides that basically say, this is about right and wrong. And when you ask me to compromise, what you're asking me to do is give up on my values and say that it's okay that you broke the law, or it's okay that you're mistreating people. And if you're going to do a deal, you need to just let something go, something. Because the only way to do a deal in Congress, in the United States government, is both sides have to declare victory. And it's got to be okay. In other words, you can't go up on stage and say, I made him cry uncle, sign. They won't let you, you don't do a deal that way. Both sides have to be able to say, I won. And your opponent needs to be able to say, yes, he did win, and so did I, as opposed to, I got exactly what I wanted and I made them eat it. And one, there's not a lot of trust on Capitol Hill. There hasn't been for a while. And two, there's no incentive. A lot of members of Congress, I say this, imagine for all of you that have jobs, and I say, do you want to keep your job? And most people in an audience will tell me, of course I want to keep my job. And I say, so do they. They kind of enjoy it. And so if they feel that there's an incentive to compromise, they'll do it. But this issue is so visceral, and they're dug in.
We do have elections, right? And that's what they think about. So, yeah, I think David's right. I mean, it's really a fascinating place that people so and part of it, I started thinking, because I've only been up there 10 months, a lot of them have never done a deal, and they've never done the give and take, because if you're in business, there's no deal that's a perfect deal. I always told everybody in my business deals, I generally got taken advantage of in all my deals, and I just figured out how to make sure they worked out. But in this, yeah, they're so worried about being perceived the wrong way. So it's very difficult to get them to have a legitimate conversation. I've been fascinated how difficult it is to get people to say, this is exactly my problem. And then I try to solve it. And if I can't, I can't.
And I would add, I mean, could there be an immigration deal? Sure, but President Trump would have to emasculate himself for Democrats to do a deal. In other words, he'd have to do something that you couldn't actually ask him to do. And when you're going to do a deal on the Hill, both sides have to understand that there are some things you can't touch. I used to say, you can't ask a Republican to vote for tax increases. A lot of things their voters will understand. But if you're a Republican voter, you don't vote for them to raise taxes. And Obama used to do this all the time. He used to say, this is reasonable. Republicans should be for this. You're asking them to raise taxes. Like they can't, they could do a lot of things. They can't do that. And right now, nobody is talking in a way that seems to understand that there are some things that are going to be off limits, but then so many other things won't be.
So, Senator, there's a question from the audience which actually goes to this issue of give and take and people you can do deals with. And it's with which Republican senator do you most agree, and with whom do you least agree? And likewise, with which Democratic senator do you most agree or least agree? Who do you work with?
Well, I like Mitch McConnell. I think I think he maximizes what we can get done. So we do have, as David said, we have a calendar, and so we don't have unlimited time. And so we've got to actually focus on what's the most important thing. Judges are permanent. So
Right.
he's put his time into that. We're not going to get a lot of legislation done. So I've known him for a long time. I lived in Kentucky at one time when I was building one of the companies. So I think he does a really good job. I've been disappointed in Mitt Romney. I think you should. I think your first reaction is, when you have a Republican president, is don't say the negative. You can disagree. Like, I don't agree with everything President Trump does, and I'll say it. But I don't start off by saying, start off with the negative. I mean, I was on. I was twice last week. He did press, and I was about to talk, and so I got to listen to his press conference, and I had to immediately react. And I didn't agree with everything he did, but I didn't start out by saying all the negatives. I said, this is what I think is right, and this is what I would do differently. And that's not what Mitt Romney does. On the Democrat side, the guy that I think is, he stopped by when I tried my thing for TPS last week, is Joe Manchin. He's because I told him, I said, Joe, I don't get it. Tell me no, tell me why or something. And he said, he said, I'll go try to find out. And he will. I have a good working relationship with him. There's others that they don't even talk to me. They will not even say hi to me. I intentionally say hi just to put him in an awkward position. And you know what's even funnier is their staff. I was on the train the other day, and this one young lady, I said, where do you work? The Senate. I said, whose office? I work in the Hart Building. And I said, do you work for a senator? Yes. She did not want to say she worked for Schumer, because Schumer won't talk to me. He spent $65 million in just PAC money against me to try to beat me last year. And he believed if he couldn't keep Florida, he couldn't become majority leader, which is good, and it was good for all of us. So, but Joe Manchin is but there's some of them. They to this day they won't talk to me. They won't get on the train. They won't get in the elevator, and their staff won't talk to me. That's most fun. Makes it easier. You don't have to talk to as many people.
Walking by with their noses in the air. I don't notice you. I don't know.
It's absolutely. It's like high school.
It is like high school.
Right? Yeah.
So I wanted to turn to the federal judiciary, and ask you what you think, what you feel the role of the courts have played in the whole immigration debate. Judges have stymied President Trump. Do you think that the judges are part of the resistance, or are they generally right in stopping? Are there how do you regard the judgments that they've made, and are they straight?
We have a little over 900 judges in Florida. I appointed 407 judges. I never asked one judge what they believed about anything, but they had to convince me they understood they were not the legislative branch or the executive branch. And what's frustrating is and it was going on in my state. It's completely changed in Florida, not for all the judges, but the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals have all changed now in Florida in the 8 years in my time as governor. What's frustrating at the federal level is they make the law. They decide they want to make the law. In my election last year, there was a federal judge in the Panhandle. He did everything he could to make sure I lost. And all the election fights had to go through him. There was one judge you had to go through, and he did everything. And so absolutely there's a resistance. But what's frustrating is they were never, ever, ever intended to make law. The legislature, the legislative branch, Congress and the state legislature, they make the law. And I didn't get to make the law in Florida. I said, I get to decide if there's a law that's passed while I'm there. And every law that's on the books, I have to enforce whether I like them or not. And that was frustrating to me as governor. I'll tell you a great story. So I get elected as governor, and so I'm going out to the agencies. I bought businesses and fixed them up and sold it. That's what I did for a living. So I go to the agency that does unemployment. I said, how's it working? My second month in office, I ran on one issue, jobs, in 2010. So they said, we're really good, Governor. We're open 6 days a week because unemployed Floridians don't have enough time to apply for unemployment during the week. They're dead serious. I said, I said, isn't there some deal that you have to like apply for a job if you go on unemployment? Oh yeah. I said, how's that going? We don't enforce it. I said, so if you find somebody that has a job and they're getting money, do you do anything? No. I said, okay, give me the pitch here. Because I did that deal where I did the oath of office. I said, I'm going to enforce all the laws whether I like them or not. They said, well, Governor, you're not thinking about this the right way. We only pay at the state level 26 weeks of unemployment. And thank God for Barack Obama. He personally gave us another 73 weeks. We're trying to get everybody we can on unemployment because it'll help our economy. The craziest idea in the world. And the legislature, these people, the judiciary, they really believe when they got appointed that they get to decide how our society runs. It's infuriating that we believe there's three branches of government. Well, just do your job and that's it, and get out of it. So absolutely, there's people inside the executive branch. So one of the frustrations I had is to appoint people to be an agency head, and then they forgot that I appointed them. I said, I ran the election, I ran on these issues, and this is what we're going to do. And so whether it's the executive branch with who you appoint, the president got elected or governor got elected, it's their agenda for that period of time. The judiciary, their simply job is to enforce the laws that are on the books and don't change them.
Absolutely. For both of you, do you think that if the Republicans take the House in 2020, that immigration reform will be passed? Will it finally get done?
I still think it'll be hard. I think there's going to be such a resistance against Trump. Let's assume Trump wins election and we have the House and the Senate, and it takes 60 people to work together in the Senate. So I still think it'll be hard. It's just the Democrats think this is Trump.
There are a number of your colleagues in the Senate who would like to see, for example, Senator Ted Cruz would like to see the filibuster ended on policy decisions, not just on appointees. How do you feel about that? Because it is something that would get immigration done, but of course it could then be used by the other side against conservative values.
I didn't know anything about it when I got up there. And I remember I was here a year ago for an event during my race, and I went and listened to Mitch McConnell talk about it because he got asked that in the event that day. And I've come to the conclusion that I think the way the Senate has organized to where it was supposed to slow down the legislation that comes out of the House to where we take more time to think about it, and we ought to have, if we're going to make big changes, that we ought to have more people agree on it. That doesn't bother me. I think you have to go sell what you're doing and why. And I don't believe in big government, and I think we ought to be careful about what laws we're passing.
David, how do you think the politics will be should President Trump be returned with a House majority?
Well, I think it'll first depend on how much of a priority he puts on this. When the president was elected, it was interesting, and to me it was interesting in a little bit in hindsight, that he attacked other issues before he really sunk his teeth in immigration. First it was trying to repeal and replace Obamacare, then it was tax reform. One worked, one didn't. Both are very worthy, but you only have so much, there's only so much political energy to do big things. And so the first question I would have is, does he try and do immigration reform right out of the gate? The second question is going to be, what strategy does he use? And then the third question is going to be, would President Trump being reelected enable him to make compromises within the Republican Party that are going to have to be made in some way? Because this is the kind of issue where people are going to be, sniping around the edges. And I tend to agree with Senator Scott that it's a tough lift because I don't know that the dynamics will change.
So you've followed this more than I have. How many big changes in policy have been made in the second term of a president?
That's a great question. And I just have to think back to, it's very hard.
So as governor, it was easier.
Yeah,
I had Sessions.
The 86 tax reform, so that was Reagan's second term. That was one of the biggest lifts that has been done in my lifetime. but it's been, and I think actually welfare reform with Clinton and the Republican Congress was Clinton's second term. So I think it's possible, but you have to do it first, because the other thing that happens is by the end of your first 2 years of your second term, you're a lame duck. The party's looking ahead. That's the nature of American politics.
And I think that welfare reform, that actually helped Clinton get his second term, didn't it? Or was it in the second term? Yeah, doesn't matter. You're probably right and probably wrong. But
I don't know. And you're my boss.
But if you go back and look at Clinton, he was more receptive to having a conversation about things. He would talk about, I remember when he was president, I was at lunch, and half the people said different things, and he agreed with everybody.
Right. And yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you too.
So I wanted, there used to be a very clear distinction between refugees and economic migrants. And I wanted to ask you, is it your impression that that distinction has been blurred? Is that a good thing? If it has been blurred, is it a good thing? Or does it actually make people sort of mistrust the refugee system?
Oh, I think it's completely blurred. I don't think people see the difference in, I don't think there's no conversation when I try to get temporary status for Venezuelans. No one looks at that. You know it if you're from Florida, but no one around the country looks at that and says that's any different than issues with the Mexican border. I think it's completely blurred now.
But should it be? I mean, refugees used to be people who could claim a well-founded fear of persecution in their own country, not people who'd say, well, there's domestic violence or something.
Well, I've never been asked that. I don't really look. I'm more interested. I really believe that our country is built on immigration. It just ought to be done in a legal manner, and we're doing it in a manner that the people are coming in, believe in our system, and want to help continue to build the country that we all cherish. So I'm more interested in that than exactly the why they're coming.
Right.
Most people, for whatever reason, they're coming here because they believe they have a chance to live a dream.
Right.
And we've just got to make sure that we always do that. It's like I don't personally believe. I have a brother that has significant mental and alcohol and drug abuse issues, and he's been enabled. I don't believe in that. I don't believe that helps any of us. I believe that my mom's approach that was pretty tough love is the right approach. I think we all ought to have to struggle and figure out how to get ahead, and that's sort of my thought process. So I don't believe we ought to create a system where people end up they have an incentive to come here to take advantage of our of the welfare system that we have. I think they ought to come here to live the dream of this country, like I got to live, and all of us got to live.
Right. Well, I think it was Milton Friedman said you can have open borders or you can have a generous welfare system. You can't have both.
You can't.
Right.
You can't afford it. Yeah. I mean, just so you know, think about the numbers we're dealing with right now. We're collecting $3 trillion in taxes and fees and spending $4 trillion a year. I mean, we're doing that year in, year out, and we're not talking about it. I mean, there's no conversation about this budget problem. There's none. Think about what happened. Trump agreed with Pelosi and Schumer with the budget deal on a Wednesday. There was no conversation basically about it. I opposed it. I came out on Friday to oppose it. I was supposed to go on Meet the Press on Sunday. Not one question about it. We passed it on Tuesday and Wednesday the next week. In 1 week, raised the debt ceiling by what, 1.7 trillion? None. There was none, no conversation.
There's no constituency for it. I mean, Republicans and Democrats on the Hill generally, there are individual exceptions, do not believe that their voters care very much about this.
Yeah. So I paid off a third of the state debt as governor. I walked in with a $4 billion budget deficit. I left the state with $3 billion surpluses, with almost $6 billion in the bank, and we fixed it at the pension, all this stuff. We went through all this stuff. Did that get me any votes? No. But what it did do is create an environment that created 1.7 million jobs. That got me votes, and that's what I ran on. So I do believe that you take all these issues on the budget. I believe it impacts everything because it impacts how much money we're going to be able to spend on the things we care about, including defense. It impacts whether we're going to have we're always going to go up and down the recessions and things, but how bad is it going to be? So I believe you have to solve these problems, because if not, when the black swan happens, it won't be an insignificant downturn. It'll be a significant downturn.
I wanted to get in a couple more audience questions, and this goes to voter ID cards and immigration. The question is, why not have voter ID card given so many illegal immigrants? Let's keep it legal. Are you a supporter of voter ID?
Yeah. You have to show ID in Florida. So
right.
yeah, well, I mean, golly, why not?
Right.
How can anybody argue you don't have to have an ID? You have to have an ID for everything.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's a good question, but a lot of people do, right?
Yeah, because I mean, it's like, how did they find 95,000 ballots after my election night? I mean, and everybody's okay with this? I mean, so,
That's a big closet.
Yeah. It's a big truck they found, I guess.
Another question from the audience. Why don't Mexico and the United States combine forces to put cartels out of business, perhaps to include both U.S. and Mexican military to get the job done quickly?
Well, right, I tell you, when so it was August, so I haven't been down to the Mexican border since August, but I can tell you the Border Patrol really believes the Mexican, I guess it's law enforcement more, is really showing up. Because we talked about what was, because if you go down there and you see the wall's pretty tough to get past, and Border Patrol are good people trying to do their job, but they said that where we don't have the wall yet, the Mexican law enforcement is showing up. So I think we do have, but you know, Mexico's got a lot of problems with corruption, and I think it's pretty tough. And look, it's a lot of money. I mean, they're making. You listen to the stories. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's $5,000 to $10,000 if you want to pay to get, and you have to pay to get across. You can't get across without paying. It's a lot of money the cartel's getting, and then on top of what they're getting to get the drugs across.
Right, and there was a video which was just circulating last week of cartels taking over, I believe, south of the border. I can't remember where it was. It was a gun battle.
El Chapo's,
El
Chapo's son. Yeah.
So a question from the audience, and that is, what do you think should be done about the 11 to 22 million illegal immigrants in the country?
The way I would do it this way. I would focus on the things that you can get done that are less controversial. I would deal with the border. I would deal with DACA. I would deal with the work visa program. I would fix TPS. I would focus on those things, because if you get all those things behind you, then it gets easier. I mean, David's done this longer than I had. That's like the holy grail of try to figure out how to get everybody to agree on that. I just think that will be so difficult that I wouldn't focus on that first.
All right. Well, I'm getting urgent messages on here saying that you have a flight to catch. And so I want to thank you profoundly for having this conversation with us. I'm really delighted you could be here. And
well, first off, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm trying to be a full-service senator. So if you have, here's what I tell people. If you have ideas, well, I don't care whether you're from Florida or not. If you have ideas, get them to me. I don't believe anybody knows the best ideas, and so one thing I try to do, and one thing my office tries to do, I have a good team of people that I work with, is try to listen to people and get ideas from people, because part of the way I look at my job, and it's always my job in business and my job as governor, we're here and we got to get to here. How do you get there? You get there by coming up with the ideas that you can move the population in a manner that they agree with you. And it won't be necessarily that it's exactly the way you started out. So if you have ideas, I hope you'll reach out to me, because I'm very receptive to getting new ideas to try to get this job done. But thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.